Welcome to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM for Tuesday, December 17th. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I'm joined by RCP President and co-founder Tom Bevan and Washington Bureau Chief Carl Cannon. So, guys, the largest federal workers union has vowed to fight incoming President Trump if he forces them to go back to work at the office. So, Tom, the background on this is that the Biden administration just finalized this contract that allows 42,000 Social Security employees to work remotely through the year 2029. Trump wants them working in the office, says he'll fire them if they won't come back. So what do you make of Trump's demand, and what do you make of Biden signing this agreement as he heads out the door?
Well, this is, I don't know how to frame it. I mean, look, it's not dirty pool. I mean, it's a little bit. It's this idea that they're going to Trump-proof the government, right? That they're going to do things that are going to make it difficult, or hopefully for them impossible, for Trump to undo across the board in all of these different, regulations and all these different federal agencies. And this is just one example. So Biden tries to stick it to Trump because he knows one of Trump's priorities and the priorities of the new Department of Government Efficiency run by Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy is to be getting these federal workers back into the office full time, 5 days a week. And so he goes and does this. And Trump, he handled it. I mean, he was talking about it the other day, and he said, look, it was kind of, he said the transition's been friendly, except for a couple of items. And this is one of the items on the list. And so they're going to take it to court, and we'll see, whether Trump prevails and is able to undo this effort by Biden to, basically throw a little bone to, throw a bone to the union, and B, give the middle finger to Trump.
Carl, what'd you think of it?
Well, you remember, I don't know if it's a good policy or bad policy. My guess is that the New York Times will be supportive, because the New York Times union is threatened to litigate this. They think now this is a right that's been given to workers, and it was done during COVID. But they say if you take it away now, you're taking away something we didn't bargain for in the previous union contract, but we've come to expect, and we've set up our lives accordingly. And they say, well, there's and if you force us to come to work, you're giving us a pay cut because we have maybe childcare things, commuting costs that we didn't have. So that's the rationale. It seems it's a little bit disingenuous, because the reason people were told to stay home was so they wouldn't die of a virus.
Right.
But having said that, the thing about it that I question, the Democrats, they ran this campaign, and it wasn't just in 2024, in 2022, in the midterms in 2020, they said they're the party that is defending democracy. But they did a series of these things. In Tom's home state, J.B. Pritzker fooled around in the Republican primary, spent millions of dollars he inherited to try and handpick the Republican nominee. They tried to kick Donald Trump off the ballot. I won't even go into trying to put Trump in prison. But this is yet another thing where we had an election. Trump ran on these things, and he won. And, they really didn't let him be president the first time. And I kind of thought they'd let him be president the second time, but I'm beginning to wonder if I maybe got out ahead of myself a little bit.
Yeah, well, according to Doge, they had a piece, I think, in the Wall Street Journal, and they said requiring federal employees to come to the office 5 days a week would result in a wave of voluntary terminations that we welcome. If federal employees don't want to show up, American taxpayers shouldn't pay them for the COVID-era privilege of staying home. Tom, that seems to me like, just in terms of being a populist message, pretty strong one. I mean, if you're an essential worker, you had to work through COVID. The idea that now COVID's over, that the federal employees would be allowed to stay home forever, is interesting. The other thing that I saw was, only 36% of the Treasury Department, are showing up at the office every day. I mean, that's pretty astounding, don't you think?
Yeah. And I mean, look, when COVID was happening, everybody, all of these private companies basically let their employees stay home, force them to stay home.
We
in some
did
cases.
at Real Clear.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the prevailing wisdom, and that's fine. But you saw, and it started happening slowly, but then sort of grew and gained some momentum. This idea that being in the office matters, right? That being around other people, that's an important part of the collaborative process, and that you're just not, and you're certainly not as productive if you're at home and you're able to step away from your computer to go, answer the phone call or watch a TV show or whatever.
Or play 9 holes.
Right.
Hey,
it's a nice weather out here on Kent Island today.
To mention that.
Am I cutting too close to the bone here?
The omerta, Carl. My God, you have broken the seal, brother. That's bad news. No, but no, it's certainly. And so you saw a lot of these corporate CEOs said, "Listen, we're gonna start." And Jeff Bezos was one of them, and some of these others said, "We got to get guys back in the office." And so that became sort of the prevailing wisdom, and I think that's where things have been headed, except for federal employees, as you mentioned. I mean, in some of these agencies, I mean, the numbers who are actually coming to the office, not even just full time, but even a day a week or so, is really shockingly low. And so I think there is and while most people have either returned to the office voluntarily or returned to the office involuntarily, I think it does become kind of a strong populist message to say, well, what about these folks? I mean, we pay their salaries,
right,
and we don't always get the best service to begin with some of this stuff. So why not make them be like everybody else and have to go into the office?
Well,
yeah,
Andy,
I guess
I want to ask you something, Andy, though.
Okay.
Because Elon Musk took over Twitter, right, and bought it, and laid off, I don't know, a third of the workforce,
right,
with no visible diminution in
I think it might
service.
be more than that. Yeah.
Yeah, on the tech side. And so I think this may, he doesn't have any experience in government, but this experience, that company turned out to have, a lot of feather bedding in it. And I wonder if that's informed his decision there, but I don't know that it's true. I don't know if all these Social Security workers quit, if they can still get the checks out and do all the work.
They probably could, Carl.
What do you think, Andy?
Well, I have
seen
no
the
idea.
DMV.
Yeah, my guess would be that there's
a third less employees.
There's always fat that can be trimmed. I also think that the decision of whether an employee gets to stay home or not, an employee can make that decision. I'm not sure it should be considered a right now or something that you would reach through collective bargaining. It seems to me that it's up to management to decide what they require of workers, and workers can either say yay or nay. But I do know this, and I will tell you, when I talk to young people, they have adjusted their lives to this, and they think that this is the normal now. And a lot of them are will make employment decisions based on whether or not they can work from home, which, more power to them. If they
I
can
guess, but I mean,
pull
it's
that
also,
off.
again, there's a whole, the socialization aspect of being in an office in a environment where you're among your peers and you're able to socialize and collaborate and do all those are important things. And just sitting alone at home, yes, is it more convenient? Can you be there in your pajamas and don't have to ride the train or the bus down to work? Great. But at the same time, there are some serious drawbacks from a socialization aspect, not to mention, I mean, if you've heard these stories, and if you have anybody who runs a company where their workers are working, remotely, that some employees, I mean, certainly some are diligent and try and, do work full days, but others are sort of gaming the system and they've bought these little mouse movers. So, because, they're tracking whether they're actually sitting at their computers or not, employers are. And people are buying these little mouse movers that make it look like you're actually doing something when you can be off playing 9 holes of golf, Carl.
Right. Yeah. Well, we're talking about young people. I want to talk about this new poll from Emerson College. This shocked me. This is on the assassination of the United Healthcare CEO, Brian Thompson. This poll from Emerson found that 41% of adults under 30 consider this murder, quote, acceptable. Another 19% were neutral about it.
Are you talking about the murder of the United Healthcare CEO?
Yes, I am. And that compares to just 10% of people over 50. So, Carl, these are shocking numbers, at least to me. How do you explain how young people could condone shooting someone in the back like this?
Andy, there have been these polls for some time now, very very disquieting. And people have written about it from the right and the left and the middle. Tom Edsel's written about it in the New York Times about how a shockingly high number of people say that political violence is sometimes justified if your side loses the election. And more Democrats and more leftists than righties, but too high in both of them. But that was a hypothetical. Now you have this case that you said this man who did nothing to this guy, who
Right.
runs this company. There's no evidence this alleged assassin ever even dealt with United Healthcare, or that he even had insurance by them. And this cowardly act, shooting someone in the back you've never met. But now it's right in front of us. And so now this is not hypothetical anymore. It's real. And for people to answer that question in the affirmative, or to say the kind of irresponsible things Michael Moore and Elizabeth Warren have been saying, it's not disaffection. It's not populist. It's nihilism. And you would think that they would understand the most basic self-interest here. Forget the morality of it. What if someone did it to you? How would you feel? Or someone did it to your hero, your political hero, or a person for an industry you like? What if someone did it to the head of the Sierra Club? Wouldn't you be appalled? And they'd say, yeah, I'd be appalled. It's like a lack of morality, but also an inability to use abstract thinking, an inability to think itself. And it's quite an indictment, I would say, of the educational system we've created. We're not teaching young people to think anymore, to think critically.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was 22% of Democrats and 16% of independents. 12% of Republicans found it acceptable. I wonder if those numbers would be reversed if the politics of the situation were different, Tom. But what do you make of this?
Yeah, I mean, it's not good, right? You look at, and we've seen other polls that show young people, they, don't believe in capitalism at the same levels as other, they don't believe in the American dream. We saw polls, they have a different view, sort of shockingly view of like October 7th, the massacre in Israel. I mean, every now and then you'll see these polls, and the younger generation just seems like out of whack on a whole bunch of different levels. Now, I'm not going to go so far as Kamala Harris to call them stupid, but it does raise questions about their morality and their grounding. And this is another example of that. I mean, yeah, 40%, that's a big number.
Yeah. And
for people who would think that this kind of thing in our society in this day and age is acceptable, it shows that they're terribly, at least on this question alone, misguided.
Yeah. Well, Carl, there was this other poll that came out, unrelated, but kind of related a little bit. It's a Gallup poll. Just came out, and it showed that America's positive rating of the quality of healthcare in the U.S. is at the lowest point since 2001. I think that's when they started asking the question. 44% say the quality of care is good. 28% say their coverage is good, that coverage is good. So it does seem like, I don't know if they're related or not, but certainly people aren't happy with the healthcare system.
Well, they say they aren't. But again, what are they comparing it to? How many of these people have lived in another country? So look, a lot of these people think they maybe like single payer, or they'd like something better. They hear this, but a poll question like that, do they really know? What are they comparing it to? And so I don't think these numbers really tell us much about the healthcare system. I think what they tell us is that these questions have a political component, and they're loaded. And people, depending on their point of view or their ideology, tend to lean in a certain way.
Well, Carl, we're going to have to leave it there. Tom, sorry you didn't get a chance to weigh in on that, but we'll be back in just a moment. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. Don't go away. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom Bevan and Carl Cannon. And Tom, CNN continues to deal with its latest reporting snafu. That's the man they showed being led out of a prison by reporter Clarissa Ward turned out to be a first lieutenant in Syria's Air Force intelligence with a long history of alleged war crimes. They were there looking for the U.S. journalist Austin Tice. So sloppy reporting for sure, but is there more to it than that?
Well, yeah, sloppy. First of all, snafu is a kind word. I mean, this is a debacle for CNN. I mean, it's just, and to your point, the best case scenario is it was just incredibly sloppy reporting. Worst case scenario is there was some prior knowledge as to who this individual was, and they made him out to be someone, who he wasn't. And either way, it's a disaster for CNN, and they're trying to sort of clean it up, but it just keeps getting worse. I mean, it's look, they touted this coverage and this story. I mean, I saw it everywhere. Anderson Cooper was touting it on his show. They were pushing it on social media. Oh my gosh, this amazing story. We found this poor prisoner who was languishing in this cell, and after Assad's regime left, and he'd been in there for months. And I watched the clip. I mean, he's under the blanket. He comes out. He's thankfully grasping onto her hand. He won't let go, and they give her water. It's all very, very dramatic. And it also turns out to be bullshit, like the whole thing. So we'll see exactly if they knew about this ahead of time. I mean, that obviously makes it an order of magnitude. It's almost a crime. Okay. I don't know. You can be charged criminally with anything.
You can't say that with Kash Patel out there looming.
Right. Donald Trump's going to sue them too. Des Moines Register, and he's going to sue CNN. He's suing 60 Minutes. He can sue CNN for this. No, but it's just a massive breach of journalistic integrity, and a breach with the trust of viewers. Not that CNN has a lot of trust left in the first place.
Well, Carl, there's no evidence that this was pre-planned or that they knew, but go ahead.
Yeah, Tom went from 0 to 60 pretty quick, didn't he?
I'm just saying that's the worst case scenario.
Listen,
we don't know.
I would assume it's just sloppiness, but this is not a time for sloppiness. You had ABC settling that case for $15 million for smearing Trump, and George Stephanopoulos, got in trouble. And Tom mentioned in the Des Moines Register, they had this poll that was so bad, people have come up with conspiracy theories to explain it. Again, I mean, my normal default position is if you don't have evidence for corruption, just assume stupidity. It's more common. But this is not what we need right now in the press. And CNN to hype this sort of story that it's a veteran reporter, British American reporter, been a foreign correspondent, been a war correspondent, transparent fraud. You would have expected her to spot it, and for their producers and editors to be, Andy, you've worked in television, to be more critical and ask some questions and to nail the story down before they went with it. And you guys know me, and I defend the press, and I want the press to do well. We've got to quit shooting ourselves in the foot.
Well, the rapidity with which this stuff gets reported now and gets out there. I mean, there's so little filter, and there's so much of an incentive to try to get on the air first with something. And there's 100 reasons why something like this could happen, but there's also 100 reasons why, because of that, you should have those kind of safeguards in place that used to be in place in terms of people. And people knew pretty quickly that there was something wrong with this story. I mean, I think that anyone who just viewed it and critically, you would say there's something, he's awfully clean, he's awfully, all those things that people were saying immediately afterwards, right, Tom?
Well, I saw it and I thought, how is a network freeing a prisoner? I've never heard of that before.
Yeah. And she did say it was one of the most extraordinary things she had seen in 20 years of reporting. And she's seen a lot of extraordinary things. You will give her credit for that.
But to your earlier point, Andy, this wasn't a scenario where, it was a story where they were rushing against their competitors to get it on air, and there was this urgent push they could have held this footage for 24 hours and checked the guy out. I mean, that's kind of a no-brainer. Actually, it's journalism 101, right, as opposed to just taking this story that could have been spoon-fed to you and throwing it up on air and then have an egg on your face, which is what they ended up with. And to Carl's point, I mean, CNN's already battling a defamation case. Jake Tapper was accused and is in court now. CNN's trying to defend itself against the claims that Tapper has slandered this veteran in terms of getting folks out of Afghanistan. And so this is like the last thing they need, but they seem to not be able to help themselves.
Yeah. Well, Carl, last word of advice. You got 30 seconds here.
Yeah. Look, we all want to get the story first. I was trained that way, but you have to get it right.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to have to leave it there, guys. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm talking to Tom Bevan and Carl Cannon. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. We're going to take a break and be right back after this.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Philip Wegmann, White House reporter for RCP, and I'm joined now by Texas Representative Chip Roy, one of the most fiscally conservative and most consistent members of Congress. He joins us from Capitol Hill, where Republicans are scrambling to put the finishing touches on an end-of-the-year CR. Congressman, how is that work going?
Well, anytime you hear the phrase scrambling and end of the year, you should run and hide if you're an American and you care about fiscal conservatism or reduction in debt or reduction in deficits, because they never go together, right? The problem we've got here is the usual swamp way of legislating. And there's always a reason, right? There's always an excuse. Sometimes there are reasonable concerns, like the disaster situation for our friends in the Southeast, farmers who are, getting absolutely hosed by the ridiculous policies of the Biden administration, inflation, and other geopolitical forces. These are all real issues. Nobody disputes that. The dispute that I have is that, as usual, we're just writing blank checks and then piling on complicated policies on healthcare, on energy, on any number of issues, buying some votes to put together a package with what they call four corners negotiations, without a whole lot of real input from those of us who have to vote on this stuff. And so we still haven't seen the text of the bill. It's 11:10 on Tuesday. Government funding expires Friday, and I'm told it's 1,400 pages, 110 billion of unpaid for additional spending, 25 billion of healthcare spending, which is half paid for by gimmicks with complicated health policy. And so, to say I've got concerns is an understatement.
Well, you mentioned the four corners, Speaker of the House, the Majority Leader, and then their counterparts in the minority. I'm curious, because leadership elections are around the corner, if how Republicans handle this CR might influence your vote for Republican leadership next year. Is this something that you're going to be remembering?
Look, I'm not going to play that game. I will say this, though, because I think it matters, that something has to change. Okay. We have this year passed an extraordinary amount. I don't have the total in front of me. I need to actually have my staff. I need to work it up. An extraordinary amount of money via suspension of the rules. We have moved extraordinary policy via suspension of the rules. We are doing the opposite of what we set out to do 2 years ago, to open this place up, have more amendments, have more say, have more engagement. And that has to change. So something's got to get sorted out heading into January that changes that landscape. We need to get back to legislating the proper way. I understand there are emergencies. We also have to get real about spending. When someone comes up to me and says, but fill in the blank, act of God, war, there's always a reason, right? Take Ukraine. We've got to stop Russia. This is an important moment. This is Churchill, all of that. They'll say, well, what about China and Taiwan? Or right now it's, disaster rate, hurricanes, it's farmers. We've got this. There's always an emergency. There's always a thing. There's always a heartstring to be tugged on. There's COVID. There's a COVID emergency. Oh, now we got to make sure we do. We always have a reason to spend money because we can, because we print money and we're destroying the country. But more importantly, we're destroying the American ethos because we're making Americans more dependent on government by continuing to fund largesse and programs and doling out money. That has to stop.
Well, Congressman, I remember there was a lot of talk among Republicans about all of the things that they were going to do when they controlled both chambers of Congress as well as the White House. And certainly, I think some of your colleagues would admit that Republicans fumbled on Obamacare repeal. But one thing that I was struck by during the Biden years is that suddenly a lot of Republicans who greenlit an extraordinary amount of spending under a Republican president, suddenly they're very happy to make fiscally conservative arguments. So is this just the way of Washington? Republicans are fiscally conservative when they're in the minority, and then they forget all of that when they have control of power.
Republicans are never fiscally conservative. That's just, prove me wrong. And if anybody wants to come debate me, come prove me wrong. What will happen is an appropriator will come up and they'll give me some figures about the last decade, about how we've held non-defense spending and even defense spending, overall discretionary spending, at a relatively low clip, they will say. I will say, well, COVID kind of blew that out of the water, but I'd also point in a lot of side deals and a lot of supplemental spending. But I would also note that, I mean, the truth is, whatever fiscal discipline that has ever been enacted has been forced upon us, forced upon Republicans. When we went through in 2011 with cut, cap, and balance, that was a political effort. Senator DeMint over in the Senate, some House guys, to push that and to get cut, cap, and balance put in place again in divided government. Republicans in the House, Obama in the White House. And so now it'll be interesting to see with Doge. I pointed out when we had Elon and Vivek, when they came in to meet with the conference, I said, look, I love what you guys are doing. Support it. You should expose all of this. You should use crowdsourcing, use AI, whatever you can. Let's identify all the waste. Let's cut it. But if you're looking for the enemy, it's right here in this room. Okay, it's all the people who vote for this stuff all the time. And we're doing it this week, right now. Mm-hmm. We are doing what we said we wouldn't do, right? Since we were elected on November 5th, by my count, we are now pushing, you correct me if I'm wrong, somewhere around $330 billion of additional deficit spending passed out of the House, certainly to be made law in the Senate. The WEP Social Security bill and the supplemental bill that we're talking about this week. I'm not even talking about any other bills. Those add up to additional deficit spending, unpaid for. They're not paid for with taxes. They're not paid for with cuts. They're just more printing of money. And Republicans said they wouldn't do that. And that's precisely what we've done in the first 45 days after the election.
So it doesn't sound like you're very optimistic that the way Congress will deal with Doge will be in a serious way. Certainly Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, they can make suggestions, but when it comes to actually, statutory authority, it doesn't seem like you're certain that Republicans will have the stomach for those kinds of reforms.
What I would tell you is two things. One, the executive branch is going to have to use every tool at their disposal, whether it's impoundment or other things, which are going to be debated some in the early part of next year, to limit spending, constrain spending, target spending where it should be. But importantly, that things are going to have to change in the House of Representatives in particular, and in the Senate too, if we expect to actually have any kind of fiscal responsibility. If I hear one more Republican come to say something like, we've got to bend the mandatory spending curve. When you hear that, that is code for we're not going to do crap. What that's code for is we're going to pretend to talk about changes because they don't want to touch or talk about Social Security or Medicare. The fact that Social Security is going to go bankrupt now 6 months earlier because of the $200 billion that we just passed that is going to actually drive up the deficits and constrain Social Security and make it go bankrupt 6 months earlier. This is the kind of thing that Republicans do that has to change. So, we'll see what happens. Do I think there can be some good things next year? Yes, but only if Republicans lead, and frankly, only if the executive branch pushes Congress.
Yeah, aside from the sequester, which you mentioned, which DeMint and others were able to sort of muscle through,
right?
I can't think of a single time in the last decade where spending actually came down substantially. And even then with the sequester, I mean, we're talking about drops in the bucket. You've said numerous times that things have to change. What is the external force or, locus that would actually make Congress move, make Congress more fiscally responsible outside of a crisis, which seems as of yet now several years down the road?
Number one, anything that President Trump puts forward to push and promote fiscal responsibility and cutting waste, cutting programs, and stopping the cycle. Number two, and relatedly, whatever Elon, Vivek, and others can do to publicly promote and show what we're doing that's wrong, that's continuing to perpetuate deficit spending. But then number three, I'd say internally, the most important thing is we have to have people that are sitting at the decision table, making decisions about what we're going to do to get this right at the outset. Because we continue to get these negotiated products among leadership four corners, a handful of committee heads, none of whom at the end of the day are really focused on fiscal restraint. They're focused on solving problems or buying a vote. Again, some of it's meritorious, right? Concern about family farms shutting down is a real problem. We should address it. This government has messed up our market so bad that farmers are dying. But I'm looking at a bill that, first of all, I don't know if that money goes to family farms or corporate farms. Second of all, I don't know whether or not what I know for sure, is that we're not paying for it. And until there's a limiting principle, then we'll never see change. And, I get told by some people in the conference, but Chip, this is an act of God. You don't need a limiting principle. Look, man, if we were actually running at reasonable deficits or balanced budget, go back to 2020 when we actually had a balanced budget, and the only time in my life, and you said to me, can we afford $10 billion for farmers to help them get over the hump? Sure, right? But once you go down that road, there is no limiting principle. So let me give you one last example, not to filibuster. I had a core supporter who was mad at me because I was challenging the wisdom of giving $100 billion to Ukraine. Just in my grill, chirp, chirp, chirp. This is terrible. Don't you know what Putin's doing? I'm like, of course I know what Putin's doing. Of course I don't like this for the Ukrainian people. Of course we have a role to try to stop Putin from moving, both because of the agreement in the 90s and also because it's just wrong. However, there are side impacts and effects. But you're mad at me because I won't sign off on another $100 billion. How about this? The top marginal rate will go up from 37% to 43%, the rate it was under Clinton, for the next 2 years, and we'll pay for your Ukraine war. Crickets. I haven't heard a thing about it since from this individual or frankly others when I bring it up. My point is that people are getting a free lunch. People are running around with their, give me my low taxes, and they never cut spending. Let me just give a warning shot to my colleagues. You are not getting tax cuts this next year without corresponding significant spending cuts that will reduce deficits. Let me be clear. That is going to be a fight and a hill that I will die on.
Very good. Well, Congressman, thank you for joining us in the middle of things there on Capitol Hill. We'll have to leave it there. I'm Philip Wegmann. You've been listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM, and we will be right back after this.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. Our next guest is Juan Williams. He is the senior political analyst for Fox News Channel, and he is an author. His latest book is New Prize for These Eyes, The Rise of America's Second Civil Rights Movement. It'll be published in January of next year. So, Juan, welcome to the program.
My pleasure. Happy holidays to you.
Happy holidays indeed. So, Juan, let's start with Trump's first 100 days, which starts in just over a month from today. Trump has told us a lot about his plans, but you write in a recent article, but as boxer Mike Tyson once put it, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. The punch that is already rattling the Trump agenda is the jolting fear of immediate failure. That doesn't sound like much of a prognosis for success. What do you think their problem is, and what do you think it's going to be?
Well, narrow majorities present a real problem for anyone. But the question for the Trump administration going in is they have promised, they want quick action on taxes. They want quick action on border security. They want quick action to remove subsidies that the Biden people put in place to support clean energy legislation. And they want to cut spending overall. So that's a lot. And ideally, in the first 100 days, you'd say, given the Trump administration's feeling that they have a mandate from the voters, having won both popular vote and the Electoral College, you'd say, well, let's see what they can do. They've got a lot going here, a lot of momentum. In fact, I would argue Trump is already acting like he is president as we are speaking.
Yeah, it does seem that way.
Yeah, but once you actually say, well, okay, so how would they do this? Once you start looking at the machinery, and Congress moves slowly in any case, it really becomes difficult, Andrew, to see how they get it done. One, let me just say very quickly, I think the Senate is going to be preoccupied with a lot of these very controversial Trump nominees, and that's going to eat up a lot of time in the first 100 days. The second thing is they have not articulated a coherent legislative strategy as yet. Here in mid-December, I guess we're just about a month out from Inauguration Day. And you say, well, what is the plan on the tax cuts? He can't just extend the 2017 tax cuts without some agreement from the members of his legislative, from the Republican caucus in the House and the Senate, and he doesn't have sort of a bottom line number in place yet to negotiate with. And you can anticipate that there's going to be some issue there. So much so that we've already heard from John Thune, the incoming Senate Majority Leader, that they want to separate. They want to put that off beyond the first 100 days and do it separately and try to give Trump some smaller victories on, bills having to do with mass deportation, making it easier to do things like that. But when it comes to spending, that's, again, is there any number? No, they don't have any number. As it comes to something more difficult like clean energy, there's no articulated plan. So it looks like to me, maybe he'll have to look overseas. Maybe he can get a deal in the Middle East or maybe get a deal with Russia. But the first 100 days in terms of congressional accomplishment, I don't see it right now. I'm not trying to be a doubter or, chill Trump thrill, but I just don't see it right now.
But and then you may well be right, and but when you look at just as a sort of microcosm of what's going on the Hill, you look at Joni Ernst and how she was sort of slammed for her what looked like maybe she was going to vote against Pete Hegseth, and now she's kind of been put back on the right track from the Trump point of view, I think. I mean, is there a lesson there in that you're right? I mean, the Senate is always difficult, but they have a pretty good majority. We can talk about the House in a minute, but the Senate, they have pretty good numbers. It seems to me like he's in a better position than he was in 2017, both for that reason and also because he's been here before. His team has been here before. They seem to be moving pretty quickly. So maybe they don't get everything done, but they get more, or do they get more done than they did in 2017?
They didn't have a good first 100 days.
That's what I'm saying, yeah.
17.
Is it going to be better this time, even if it isn't everything that Trump would like?
Well, I think part of it, and this is what you're talking about, I think, in specific, has less to do with Congress and more to do with executive orders and his willingness to employ executive orders to say, here's what I want to do and here's what I'm going to do. And if you want to challenge me, if you want to go to court, well, okay, fine. But I'm doing this. And I think you'll get big headlines and you'll get people like you and me talking about what Trump has ordered.
Right.
So he will get that done. And I think, but in terms of actual legislation, that's what I was looking at, the kind of, the pork grinding machine that is Capitol Hill. I don't think he's going to do that well. Now, you mentioned something quite interesting because you said, look at Joni Ernst. You've got a lot of pressure put on her already. The thought that she might be primary for opposing one of Trump's cabinet nominees. And let me just say that I think what you're seeing there is that Joni Ernst has gotten in line, to quote your language, in terms of allowing the process to go forward, that he will get a confirmation here, that it's not the case that he will be, like Matt Gaetz, thrown out because he doesn't have the Republican support necessary. So let's say he gets into the process. It's still going to be a very time-consuming confirmation process. The Democrats have every right to ask questions. And I think you're going to see people like Ernst, a combat veteran, someone who's been a victim of sexual assault, really put on the public spotlight. So it's not just a matter of what's going on behind closed doors with GOP pressure or even pressure in her home state, Iowa, but on a national stage. And we'll see how it plays out there. No guarantees.
Yeah. You're listening to RealClearPolitics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm talking with Juan Williams of Fox News. Let's talk about the House for a minute because you wrote about that as well. How difficult is it going to be for Mike Johnson to forget about the House, control his caucus and deliver what the president wants?
Well, I'm an old man, Andrew, and I've been around. So I remember John Boehner, I remember Paul Ryan. I remember so many people who have tried with bigger majorities to get stuff done with the Republican caucus. And the track record is not good
Right.
in terms of Republican productivity over the last few legislative sessions with bigger majorities. Johnson's challenge, is going to be to somehow wrangle support for Trump, and his biggest ally in that would be Trump, because I think a lot of these people are worried about, crossing Trump. I mean, yesterday at a news conference, you heard Trump say, with regard to the nominees, I'm not going to pressure and challenge people, primary them if they have legitimate reasons for questioning a nominee. But it's the same thing in the House when it comes to legislation. I mean, right out the box, they don't want to anger Trump. Trump is the king. So you would think that would be a help to Johnson. But then Trump will do something like the TikTok thing where he says, oh, yeah, I am in favor of a ban on TikTok. No, I'm not. Wait, I'm not. When you get stuff like that, when he's moving fast, it's impossible then to say, I'm going to hold on to all of my Republicans in the House because they have clear marching orders. They don't have clear marching orders. And even on a tax bill, which is, a big promise, you got to think, well, okay, so what is the number that we're all told to agree to? And that's not there yet. But Johnson, I think just, in dealing with some of the Freedom Caucus people, is going to be up against it, because if he loses one or two, that's the game.
Yeah. Well, I know, Juan, you're not in the business of giving the Republicans advice on how to advance their agenda, but it does seem to me like what you're saying is if they do want to advance, they should take smaller bites and get some executive orders through, get a few single hits, if you will, in terms of legislation, and not try to go for something big like some people are talking about doing, sort of one bill that throws the budget and immigration and everything into one big smorgasbord.
Well, I wish I was so confident a human being that I thought that my advice was valuable to my pals on the Republican side, but I know that's not true. But I think it's just a matter of reality, that I don't see them getting any big ticket items out the door. I think that's why you're seeing people talk about doing things in stages, and the tax cut as the big chunk for much later in the year, just before the 2017 Trump tax cuts would expire.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. So it would be like, well, what can we do? Because we do want to create the impression for Trump voters and supporters that we are getting things done, that we are satisfying the agenda. I think you're going to see some stuff done to try to make it easier to deport illegal immigrants. The question is, well, what more can you do? And you've got to put money in place if you want to build big detention centers, and there's going to be controversy. So I don't know. But there's smaller bites that can be taken. Maybe some of the tariffs that we've heard about. I don't know.
Yeah, there's a lot he can do with the pen, as Obama used to say, right?
The executive action, right?
Yeah. Hey, we've got about a minute left here, and I just want to give our listeners a preview of the new book, which comes out in January. Excited about it. Just give us a headline. What's different about this one than your last treatment of the same topic?
Well, my last treatment of civil rights in America was more than 30 years ago. It was a book called Eyes on the Prize, America's Civil Rights Years, and it covered the period 1954, the Brown decision, through 1965, passage of 64 Civil Rights Act, 65 Voting Rights Act. And as you and I, as political people, we know how much of an impact that had. But maybe the greatest fruit of the voting rights period was the production of more Black elected officials around the country, and ultimately a Black president, Barack Obama.
Right.
And so in this book, I'm arguing that we're seeing a second civil rights movement that began with talk of a post-racial America. And then you had the emergence of Black Lives Matter. Remember Trayvon Martin's killing and all that. And then you had the opposition, the Tea Party, the kind of populist opposition emerge. And Trump really personified much of that, going after Obama with the birther movement, and then his surprise victory in 2016. And subsequent to that, we've had George Floyd and those big protests. So all of that is an amazing American history story that I'm trying to tell and suggest to people, hey, wake up. We're right in the middle of another civil rights movement. Instead of talking about who's the next Dr. King or what happened back in the mid-20th century, Early 21st century is jumping off with a lot of very pertinent, important racial discussions, and I just want people to be aware of it.
Yeah, well, it's fascinating stuff. I look forward to the book, and we'll have you back. Promise me you'll come back in January and we can talk about it more in depth.
Well, with you, talking politics is a pleasure. So thank you, Andrew. I appreciate that invitation.
Great. Well, Juan, we're going to have to leave it there. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I've been talking to Juan Williams. That's our show for today. Hope to see you back here tomorrow. Have a great evening.